Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we're gonna go over getting started with V1Driver for your Valentine 1 Gen 1 or Gen 2. Now, V1Driver is an awesome app available for both iOS and for Android. I think it's especially popular for iOS because it's really the only option available that gives you things like not only low-speed muting, but also your automatic GPS lockouts. It adds voice alerts to your V1.
KA band 34.673.
Plus, it also logs all of your alerts for you. And if you have an Apple Watch, it also adds Apple Watch integration. The main appeal here of V1Driver is it helps add a bunch of extra useful functionality to your V1 to help improve its false alert filtering capabilities. Again, low-speed muting to keep it quiet around town, plus automatic GPS lockouts. Now, one of the great things here about V1Driver is it does an awesome job of just kind of silently running in the background and adding this extra functionality to the V1. You can pretty much just buy the app. It's $10. Go ahead and get it set up initially, and then it's just going to do an awesome job of just sitting in the background and kind of magically adding the GPS muting capabilities to your V1. You can get in and out of the car. There's no more worrying about having to manually start an app or anything. It just connects every time you get in the car and adds that extra GPS functionality. It's very handy. And so in this video, we're going to go over how to get things set up here with V1Driver. We'll go over connecting to your V1. I'll walk you through some of the main features of the interface, plus then we'll kind of go into the different settings and options, and I'll point out a couple of settings that I think are worth noting, as well as maybe some of the changes that I make when I'm running V1Driver. Now, I'm not going to go and actually explain every single setting that's available here in the app. There's actually a couple of great resources that are available for this. You'll find things like I've got an article on my website that explains all the different menu options. The developer, MSW logo, has actually done an hour-long video that actually walks you through all the different options. He did it on Android, but a lot of the stuff here is also going to apply on iOS. He also, on his website, has a lot of great information and images that show you the interface and explain a lot of the features of the app. Plus, he's also built a lot of information directly into the app itself. Like, for example, if you go into the settings here and you go into any one of the different sections, if you check one of the boxes, you'll get a little pop-up here that explains what that option is for. And then if you want, once you get comfortable with the app, you can go in and turn off all of these different help pop-ups for you. Plus, you always have the option, if you look at the top right, there's a little eye circled in blue. You can tap on that and it's just going to go ahead and show you what everything means and explain every single different menu option. So there's a ton of great resources built into the app, plus some things that you can check out online, and I'll link down in the video description to all of those as well, down beneath where you can go to download the app. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and start diving into the app. Now, if we take a look here at the main screen, let's just go ahead and trigger an alert real quick. I've also got my V1 just right here. Where is it? Right there, next to my head, up on the counter. And let's just go ahead and trigger it so you can see what the alerts look like.
KA band 34.675.
So you can see it'll just display the alert right there. I can tap on the phone like this to go ahead and mute the alert if I want. And you can see it also has the pop-up with all of the different things you can do for tapping, snoozing, locking out signals. The lockout, as you can see, it's going to be a swipe. So if we trigger here a K-band alert with the V1, so right now the signal is actually being muted due to low-speed muting. I'll talk about that in just a second. But if you want to lock out this signal manually, you can take two fingers and just swipe across the screen like this. You'll see it says locked out K-band signal at the top. If you want to unlock, we'll just pull it up here again real quick. If you want to unlock it, you just swipe to the left like that to unlock the signal. Now, for the low-speed muting, you can see it says Savvy 35 in blue text. That means I've got it set right now to 35 miles an hour, and any signals below that, it's going to mute. You can see the red text just below that. Right now it says 2 miles an hour, 1 mile an hour. A little bit of GPS drift and bounce here as I'm sitting inside. But I can actually take this slider and adjust my low-speed muting threshold. So we'll set it to 0 real quick to override the default Savvy setting. And you'll notice that now I can trigger it, and it's going to go ahead and mute like that. And again, I can just tap to mute the alert like that. And then if I want to switch between the Savvy setting that I've just set and the default option, I can just tap the blue text, and you'll see it's just going to instantly switch back to what it was before. And again, there's the pop-ups you can see for all the different options, but you can just switch back and forth between your default option programmed in the menu. The default is actually 20 miles an hour. I'll show you that in just a second. I've got it set to 35. But if you want to try different options, you can just tap on screen like this to switch back and forth. And then you can see it's got that histogram on screen. And I'm kind of between takes. I'm shooting it and trying different things. But you can see every time I trigger the alert, it'll just show up on screen. I'll trigger it again. Just mute it again real quick. And you can see it'll actually show you the signal strength over time. So as you're getting closer to a signal, you can see the signal getting stronger, and then eventually after you pass it, it'll get weaker. So some useful information here. Something else that I want to point out is at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen that says Bluetooth. You'll notice right next to it, it says V1 online. If you want to disconnect from your V1 manually, tap that Bluetooth text, and you'll notice it says user off. This can be especially useful because if you want to connect to the V1 with V1 connection, the Valentine app, to program the V1, you'll want to disconnect from V1Driver first because you can only have one app connected to the detector at a time. Now, V1Driver does an amazing job of automatically reconnecting, which is great for getting in and out of the car, but it's kind of annoying if you want to maybe use a different app or something. So that's how you disconnect it first. Then you go over to V1 connection, make all of your settings and changes to the V1 itself, then come back over here to V1Driver, tap the Bluetooth text right there again, and then it'll go ahead and reconnect to the V1 manually. Again, by default, it's going to handle automatic reconnection every time you get in the car beautifully, but that's actually how you do it manually when necessary. All right, so now let's go ahead and start diving into the options, and let's also go over how to manually connect to the V1 for the very first time after you install the app. So what I'm going to do here real quick is I'm going to go into the settings, and there's an option here for iCloud and reset settings. I'm going to go in there real quick and just back up my settings here that I've got for V1Driver before I do a factory reset. This can be really useful if you maybe want to upgrade phones at some time. You can just back up like this and restore, or if you have maybe multiple phones, you can program everything here, and then if your spouse also has a V1 and V1Driver, you can just duplicate the settings for them. If I guess you're logged into the same iCloud account, but this is really helpful here. Now, anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just reset all of my factory settings. My lockouts and everything will still stay, but the settings here for V1Driver, you can see the colors changed, all that kind of stuff, but this is just going to start us off from scratch here. So we'll go back here to the main screen. We're going to need to accept. And then the first time you're going to want to connect here, you launch the app, and you'll notice it says user off at the bottom. So we'll just tap this Bluetooth text at the bottom left. If it's not automatically connecting, it's going to go ahead and search for a V1 and then go ahead and find it and automatically connect to it, and that's it. This is going to work, of course, if you have a V1 Gen 2 that has Bluetooth built in, or you have a V1 Gen 1 version 3.892 or newer with a Bluetooth module. Anyway, now that you're connected, you can see it says V1 online and you're good to go. You can see we'll go ahead and trigger an alert again.
KA band 34.7 side.
And you'll notice this is a little bit different. The screen, of course, is in black, and it's got this new display, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's a little bit different, the alert presentation, and we can go in and customize all this and a lot more, which we can do in the settings. So let's go ahead and start diving into the settings here. So we'll press that little kind of nut wrench icon thing at the bottom right, and we'll start here first with Savvy settings. So we'll pull that up. Now, Savvy, this is going to be our low-speed muting that's available here in the detector, or in the app, rather. You can see by default it's 20 miles an hour. I like to turn it up to maybe 35 or so. And you can see it also shows you with this little pop-up what all of these different options are, which again is really helpful as you're learning the app. And then we'll just tap it real quick here to make it go away. You can also see that by default it's going to mute K-band and X-band for us. You can do the same thing with KA or whatever you like, but by default it'll be K-band and X-band. Now, something else that I want to point out are the two options at the bottom, Savvy Warm-Up and Savvy Cooldown. This is specifically to help you do things like muting the detector if you don't have a great GPS lock, such as if you are in a parking garage and the garage is actually blocking the GPS signal, so you don't have a good GPS lock in your phone. Savvy Warm-Up is for when you start up your car. So you start your car in a parking garage, and it's going to give you by default, you can see 120 seconds or 2 minutes of low-speed muting before the detector gets a good GPS lock. That way, if you start in the parking garage and there's K-band sensors, there's automatic door openers. I've seen some parking garages actually have speed signs inside them. So if you're getting false alerts where you don't have good GPS, this is going to give you 2 minutes of K-band muting before you get a good GPS lock, which can be helpful. Now, the other option, Savvy Cooldown, is for when you're finishing driving and now you're pulling into the parking garage to go park. If you're pulling in, let's say, at low speed and then you lose GPS because of the parking garage, it can actually give you a period of time of where it's going to assume that you're still driving at low speed, which may or may not be the case, but it probably is. It's going to assume that you're still driving at low speed and still give you low speed muting even if you don't have a good GPS lock. So by default, it doesn't do anything there. If you want to change it to, let's say, a minute, for example, you can do 60 seconds. Now the next option, let's go into the GPS settings. This is primarily going to be for your GPS lockouts. There's a couple other things that are affected that aren't lockout related, but this is primarily for your automatic GPS lockouts. Now, you don't really have to go in and mess with this stuff too much. The lockouts are pretty sophisticated. They're some of the best lockouts that you'll find in any radar detector or app. They're better than any lockouts that you'll find actually built into any radar detector directly. Now you can see we've got a couple options here. By default, it's going to automatically learn your lockouts for K-band and for X-band. Moving on, let's take a look at the auto mute and snooze settings. A couple things to point out here. So first, auto mute, the way auto mute works here on the V1, by default, it's backwards than most detectors. With the V1, if you're running it in logic mode, which is what they recommend actually running the V1 in if you're using V1Driver, not all bogeys mode and not advanced logic mode. You're going to want to run it in logic mode with a little L. I'll drop a link in the video description where we go into some discussion in the forums about why this is the case. But if you're running V1Driver, run it in a little L mode. Now, the way it works here is by default, it's going to mute any weak signals, maybe a signal farther away, and then as you start getting closer to it, it becomes more of a threat. The V1 is then going to start alerting at full volume. Most detectors operate the opposite way. They first start alerting at full volume to get your attention, and then after a couple seconds, once they have your attention, then they're going to drop the volume down. So again, opposite of how the V1 does it. If you'd like the auto mute functionality where it's full volume first and then reduce the volume, that's what the auto mute option is for here in the V1. And you can see by default, it's going to auto mute after 5 seconds. And you can adjust that however you like, and it's only going to apply here for K-band or X-band. Again, you can adjust that as well. Now the auto mute with snooze, that's a cool feature as well that you don't really see in a lot of radar detectors. The snoozing functionality is specifically to help quiet down false alerts from blind spot cars that the V1 itself can't directly filter out. Let's say, for example, you're driving down the highway and there's a car ahead of you that's shooting blind spot radar back at you. As you get closer to the car, the signal gets stronger, your V1 picks it up and it gets a false. As the car gets maybe farther away, it doesn't pick it up anymore and the detector goes silent. Then you get closer, it falses, farther away over time, it goes quiet. And you're sitting here having to repeatedly mute the V1, trying to get it to be quiet because it can't filter that signal out. That's where snoozing comes in. The idea here with snoozing is if it sees that alert, it's going to track it for the next 2 minutes by default. Again, you can look in the app, you can see 120 seconds. So for 2 minutes, it's going to track this frequency signal. If the signal goes away and then comes back away within 2 minutes, it's going to continue going ahead and just immediately muting that signal and not alerting at full volume and then muting after a couple seconds. It's just going to go ahead and mute it right out of the gate. That's the snoozing feature. If the car is gone and it's been more than 2 minutes and you haven't seen it since, that snooze is going to disable. And then if you see a similar frequency signal again in the future, it'll then alert to that normally. So it's basically helping add some additional BSM or muting on top of what the V1 can do if there's a couple cars that you're driving with in traffic that it keeps falsing to. Pretty helpful feature. That's the BSM snoozing. And then at the bottom, there's also the watch wrist mute. If you have an Apple Watch, you have the ability to just look at your wrist to see that signal, and that motion can also trigger a mute on the V1. You can turn that muting on and off as you like just by turning the wrist watch mute feature on or off. Next, let's go over to the sound settings. This is going to adjust, well, some of the audio that V1Driver can do. So a couple things here that I like to change and adjust. If we point out the vibrate on connect at the top, I like turning that off. It basically says when the V1Driver connects to your V1, it just has a vibration. If you have the V1 in your pocket, for example, it's just a nice just reminder indicator of hey, V1Driver connected to your V1 successfully. Great. I find that to be a little annoying. Once you get used to it and you know that it connects reliably and consistently, you can just turn it off, but that's what that feature is for. There's also things like it can play the audio alerts through your car stereo, and the V1 boot tones are going to duplicate the V1 startup tones and play them through your car stereo from the app. And that just helps to verify that the audio is working properly through your car stereo and the volume levels are set properly and everything. So it's just extra verification for that, but you can turn that off if you don't necessarily want the extra startup tones every time you get in the car. There's also things like HFP. The V1Driver can play audio over Bluetooth, which is great if you're normally streaming music or if you've got it plugged in for Apple CarPlay, which is how I normally run it. It's playing that way. You can also have it do things like force it to always use the phone speaker. You can see that's the option there. So different ways to play with the audio output, a lot of controls here. Now the HFP option, this is for the hands-free protocol. It's kind of what your phone will do if you get a phone call. It overrides your car stereo for sure and says, this is important. We've got a phone call coming in. This takes over the car stereo audio. You can do the same thing here with the V1, which can be especially helpful if normal playing over Bluetooth or CarPlay or something doesn't work. You can use HFP instead. There's a little bit of a lag here for it to actually switch over to a phone call simulation, but that's the HFP option. So as you can see, there's a number of different ways here to get audio to connect through your car. There's also things you can do, like you can see it's got the volume controls or the volume specifically for HFP. And this is nice for things like you can independently control your car stereo volume, turn it up or down, and then have a separate audio level coming in for the phone audio or for the HFP audio, separate from maybe your podcast audio or Spotify audio. So you have independent controls here, which is really helpful to make sure that you can turn the volume down in one area, but you're still going to be able to hear the alerts coming from V1Driver. Now, if you don't have a radar gun, it would be nice, of course, to get in your car and just start triggering the detector and try it in connected with your FM stereo playing, if you're streaming music over Bluetooth, if you're on a phone call, if you have it plugged in versus wireless, or whatever the different ways that you run the V1, you can test it with all these different things to get it dialed in for your car and the volume levels that you like. If you don't have a radar detector to actually trigger it, one thing you can do is we'll go back here. Let's go back and we're going to first disconnect from the V1 by tapping the Bluetooth text at the bottom left. Then we're going to be able to go back here into the settings, and at the bottom we're going to tap on demo. We'll just hit OK, and this is just going to run a quick simulation of a recording of V1Driver alerting you to a Ka band signal and a K-band signal.
Ka band 34.7 ahead.
And so you can hear V1Driver is actually outputting some audio, and when you hear that audio, you can actually have it play through different ways in your car, as like we talked about, just to verify that everything is working properly. So if you don't have a radar gun necessarily, this is a great way to kind of maybe simulate some of the alerts. If you look at the screen, you'll notice this display is a little bit different than what I normally run with the list of different signals. With this one, if we take a look at it, we'll get to this in just a second, but you'll see we've got a 34/7 signal ahead. It's starting to get closer to us, which means the signal is getting stronger. The signal is also ahead of us first, and then it becomes to the side, and then it's going to switch back to the rear. You'll notice it's also moving to the side a little bit. If it's farther away, that means it's a weaker signal. If it's closer to us, it's a stronger signal. I'm personally not a huge fan of this display because you see the signals are just going to start kind of dancing all over the place, and I like just being able to look at them and seeing them there. But some people like kind of the visual indication, so you can kind of estimate distance, sort of, kind of, and direction and stuff. So that can be a useful feature for people, and that's an option that we can show you how to turn on and off here in just a second. For the next option, let's go into the notification settings. These are great if you like to run the app backgrounded and maybe Waze or Google Maps in the foreground, and you have V1Driver in the background, which I think is how most people are going to be running the detector, or running the app. You'll notice if we just put the app to the background, and we'll go ahead and trigger the detector again.
Ka band 34.7 behind.
You can see we've got that notification at the top, and we can tap on it to, well, it would normally drop us here back into the app, but it'll bring the app back into the foreground. That notification at the top is a handy way of, if you're running the app backgrounded, to still be able to see maybe the frequency or the information from the V1, especially if you don't have a frequency display on the detector itself. So those are the notification options, and you just have options for what notifications you want. I like going in and disabling most of them except for just Ka band. That way it doesn't, give me notifications for every unmuted K-band alert or all that kind of stuff. So I turn off most of that and I just run with Ka-band. But again, you can just customize what notifications you want on your V1. Now the next one, let's go into the voice option. So as you heard it, announced Ka-band 34/7, right? We can go in and have it speak a ton of stuff for us. You can have it tell you, the direction of the signal. Where is that signal? Is it ahead or behind? You can have it tell you all clear. There's no more signals present. You can have it J out the junk, so it's like alerting to K-band, and then it kind of gives you a different sound, and it says, oh, sorry, that wasn't a legit signal, that was a Cobra false or something. You can have it speak all this kind of stuff. I personally only really want it to speak K-band alert, so I turn most of this stuff off. Or Ka-band, I don't know if I said K or Ka, but anyway, I've got it set up here just to alert to Ka, and it speaks also the frequency, and if it sees multiple signals, it'll also tell me that too, which I find pretty helpful. One other thing I like is I'll go down here, and for frequency precision, instead of 1, by default, it'll say, 34/7 or 34.769 will get rounded up to 34.8. I'll go in here and I'll set it to 3. So now it'll actually speak, 34.769 or 672 or whatever. I like having the 3-digit precision, and you have the option here of customizing and controlling all that kind of stuff. Anyway, next, we can go into the voice in the box option. So voice in the box, you can basically create a little box, a frequency range, if you will, and you can say any signals within this frequency range will have a certain voice alert. You can have it speak the stalker gun or a Decatur or MPH or whatever. You can just set it up to speak certain things depending on the frequency range of the signal. I don't personally use it, but you have the option here. Okay, going back. The next one, mute in the box. This can be pretty helpful. We've got an option here for 23.9 to 24.050 turned on by default. This is nice for maybe V1 Gen 1 users who would enable Euro mode to get custom sweeps for better performance. Doing that would enable K-band scanning below 24.050, and so there's a box in here by default that will just go ahead and mute any signals below that frequency range, which we don't typically need here in the US. Now, I'll normally just go in and delete that one, but I will create another box to help maybe quiet down false alerts from Mazdas. Those, a lot of times, the V1 Gen 2 can't filter those out. So what I'll do is I'll go in here and I'll create a box for 24.123 to 24.124. And I'm going to say any signals in this frequency range, legitimate or false, I want you to just go ahead and mute all of them. It is potentially risky because there could be a legit K-band signal in this range, but I don't have a ton of K-band in usage here, and I see quite a few Mazda falses, and so this can be just an extra way to help add some additional muting on top of what the V1 can do on its own. All right, so next, moving on, let's take a look at the presentation settings. So this is going to be kind of adjusting the visual display when you're looking at the app itself. A couple things that I like to change here. You can see we've got a day mode, a night mode, and an auto mode. I like to set it to auto. It basically says, well, it adjusts the color. We had a black background for night mode. Daytime will make it a white background like this. Auto mode will just automatically switch between, well, daytime it's white and nighttime it's black. So I like that. I also like to go in here and change from bogey polar to bogey list. This is going to change that display like I showed you earlier. So instead of seeing signals kind of like move around on screen, it just creates a fixed list of signals that show up instead. This is the mode that I prefer. I think most people would run it this way, so I wanted to point that out as well. Now, if you want to turn off all the different pop-ups that we've been seeing here in the app, you can turn off the help tips like that, and then you'll no longer get these kind of green, well, help tips that pop up. I'll tap on it to make it go away. So once you get familiar with the app, you can just tap on that and they'll go away. I also like to turn off the Bluetooth RSSI, the signal strength indication. That can be useful for troubleshooting if you're getting dropped connectivity issues or whatever, but I just turn that off so I don't need to necessarily look at it on screen. So there's other stuff here that you can play with too. The K-band coverage could be kind of nice if you take a look. Like you can see right here at the middle of the screen, there's a gray bar. That's going to show you the frequency range that the detector is scanning for on K-band. You can see a little kind of blue sliver there. That's actually where I created the muting for the Mazdas at 24.123 to 124. It shows you that. And also here, we'll just go ahead and trigger another K-band alert real quick. Do that. Boom. Go ahead and tap it on screen to mute, and you'll notice once I tapped it, you have not only the red alert, shows you where that signal is actively, but here, we'll do it again. You can see it now adds that blue kind of frequency range around it that just shows you how wide the detector is muting. Because the frequency can drift a little bit, the signal frequency can drift, it'll kind of mute a little bit of a range. And so it can actually show you what sections of K-band are being muted. You can see right now it's actually showing me that it's snoozing that alert for 2 minutes, and it's got a little countdown timer there. But that's kind of the K-band bar that it's showing you. And if you don't necessarily need that, I honestly don't really use it while driving. I didn't even know it was there until I started kind of messing around with the app to shoot that video. But you can go into presentation settings and you can turn off that K-band coverage bar like this. And you'll notice now when we go back, that bar is gone. So if you'd like to see that information, to see kind of how much of K-band is being muted during low-speed muting or lockouts or manual muting or whatever, that's kind of a cool feature. I don't really see that available in I don't think any other radar detectors or apps. So just kind of something interesting. Maybe some of the boxes stuff, but anyway. Moving on, we also have the iCloud stuff, which I showed you before. We could back up our settings, we could restore them, or go back to factory defaults. These are all available here. Now the Bluetooth stuff. This, you can see the first option here, auto run Bluetooth. This is kind of what tells V1Driver to automatically reconnect to the V1, and it does a great job here. The only times I disable that are if I'm maybe doing some like JBV1 testing, let's say, and I've also got my Android phone. V1Driver does an incredible job of automatically reconnecting in the background, which is great if you're running the V1 full time, which is like almost everybody with your iPhone here. Because I run both apps for testing and all this kind of stuff, sometimes I'll go in here if I'm going to be regularly using JBV1, so the V1Driver doesn't automatically connect before JBV1 can connect. It does, again, a really good job of automatically reconnecting, so I just go in there and turn that off. But most people leave it turned on, and it'll do a great job of connecting every time you get back in the car. And then we can go into hardware settings. Most of the stuff you don't really necessarily need. There's Auto Re-Enable K, a useful feature for maybe V1 Gen 1 owners. If you're running Euro mode and custom sweeps, sometimes you could maybe accidentally change it from big C to little c. And this can just automatically re-enable K-band if you accidentally turn it off when you're driving or something. Now, what I do want to point out is the V1 display mode. Again, you can see the V1 right there, next to my head. We'll go ahead and actually show you what the alerts are like. You can see I've got a couple different options. There's V1 display mode on, exclusive, off, and auto. On means it's always going to be on the V1's display itself no matter what. Off means the V1's display is always off no matter what. So if you want to run the detector in like stealthy mode, let's say, and you're only maybe listening to alerts, or you only want to see the alerts here on the phone's display, you have that option and control here just by turning the V1's display off at all times. Exclusive is a little bit different. Exclusive will say if the app is running in the foreground like this, I want the V1's display turned off. If I have a V1Driver running in the background, my V1's display will turn on. So you're only going to have exclusively the phone or the V1, but not both at the same time. If I bring V1Driver back, my V1's display will turn off. So that's the exclusive option. Now the auto option is designed specifically to help maybe if you're complaining about the V1's display blinking like crazy when you are in a shopping center parking lot just with all the arrows and door openers and everything. Auto mode is specifically for that. Auto mode is going to say leave your display on at all times. But if you're seeing a K-band signal that's being muted, I want you to go ahead and turn off the display, so long as the detector is being muted automatically either by GPS lockouts or low-speed muting. And then finally, we can go on over to debug settings. Now, debug settings isn't a section that you're really going to need to use all that much. It's mostly if you have issues and you need to help debug them and maybe send logs over to the developer, that kind of stuff. One thing that I do use is the display distance to POI. That can be useful for testing. Sometimes you've seen in my videos to where I can actually show in real time the distance to the radar gun, and that has been pretty useful. I just create a point of interest, a POI, where the radar gun is, and it can just in real time display that right on screen. So that's kind of a cool sort of secondary use of it. But yeah, that's just a cool feature I wanted to point out as well. But I think for most people, you're not really going to need the debugging stuff. But anyway, that's pretty much it here for the app. We'll just go back to the main screen and there you go. For the most part, I mean, once you get things dialed in here, you can just take the app or just let it run in the background. Again, it can just be in your pocket. You can have it on screen to run Waze or Google Maps or whatever, and you don't really need to mess with it much anymore. You might want to go in initially to do things like adjust what it says when it gets alerts, things like that. But otherwise, it's just a great way to add low-speed muting and GPS lockouts and your voice alerts as well to your V1 Gen 1, a newer Gen 1, or a Gen 2. So anyway, that's just a quick run through here of V1Driver. If you need some additional information, hop on over to any of the resources that I posted down in the video description, or if you have questions, head on over to the V1Driver section on RDF. You can ask questions from fellow V1Driver users. MSW Logo, the developer, is very active there as well, so you can get questions answered directly from the guy who created the app. Really helpful. So yeah, head on over. You can buy the app. It's $10. I think it's a fantastic option here for the V1. It's really the only good option here on iOS. There's some other good options available for Android, like JBV1. You can get V1Driver here on Android. It does a great job of just connecting in the background quietly, versus JBV1 has more functionality, but isn't quite as like background nice. I mean, you can run in the background too, but this I think just does a great job of sort of sitting in the background and just kind of adding the GPS functionality too. So anyway, especially for you iOS users, here is a great option that's available here. So yeah, that's that. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you in the next video.